So good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which is how communication and advocacy matter in brain injury recovery. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rachel Ishak, and I'm a community outreach specialist here at the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, prevention strategies, advocacy, and support for those who have been affected by brain injury. I would like to announce some upcoming events that we have. On May 8th, we have our annual professional seminar, and on June 11th, we have our Family Fest. You can find more information and register for these events on our website. And we also have our next webinar on May 24th, which is improving sleep quality after brain injury. And more information will be available on our website, but I've also put in the chat a link for you to register if you are interested in attending that webinar. I just have a few housekeeping notes before we begin the presentation. Attendees' microphones have been muted, so if you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them into the Q&A box. We will get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available for viewing on the BIANJ website afterwards. At the end of the webinar, you will receive a link for the post-webinar survey in the chat. We value your feedback, so you are encouraged to complete the survey. You must complete the survey in order to receive a certificate of attendance. So once you complete that survey, you will automatically receive the certificate of attendance via email. And so today, our presenters who we have with us are Kelly and Michael Lang. Kelly Lang is co-author of The Miracle Child, Traumatic Brain Injury and Me, and she's a brain injury survivor and caregiver to her daughter who sustained a traumatic brain injury in 2001. Her advocacy began the day they arrived in the hospital and continues today. Kelly is a member of the Brain Injury Association of America's Advisory Council and serves on the Virginia Brain Injury Advisory Council. Her advocacy experience includes working with the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems Brain Injury Learning Collaborative, and serving as a member of the Traumatic Brain Injury Leadership Group and the Person-Centered Advisory Group. Kelly has presented at several conferences and webinars, including the Administration for Community Living Stakeholder Day, association conferences, universities, and many others. Kelly and her husband created a website educating others about brain injury. And then we also have with us Michael Lang, who is a vice president of a national association and has been published in various fields, including safety, transportation, sustainability, and the chemical industry, as well as being a featured speaker and presenter in various professional organizations and conferences. He is the co-author of The Miracle Child, Traumatic Brain Injury and Me, which was on several Amazon best-selling and new release categories. Michael also serves on the board of a financial institution. He earned his Certified Safety Manager designation in 2020 and has retained his Project Management Professional designation since 2005. Michael is a member of the Project Management Institute, National Association of Safety Professionals, and a program committee member of the National Safety Council. Michael holds a Bachelor of Science degree in journalism from the University of Maryland. So with that, I am pleased to welcome Kelly and Michael Lang.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for hosting us today. We're very happy to be here with the Alliance.
Yes, thank you. And it's nice to be presenting to my home state of New Jersey. So always have to put that little plug in. So today we're going to talk about communication and advocacy and how they matter in brain injury recovery, not just for the patient, but also for the caregivers and the family. I'm sorry, I'm having a little issue. There.
So maybe we'll start off just by talking about some of the objectives, some of the things that we like to talk about today. One of the objectives is to recognize the actions to support those with brain injury.
Assess the accommodations for success in school and other environments.
And another objective, to discuss the variety of techniques for advocating.
So our story obviously begins before 2001, but I'll start with 2001 because that was the difficult year. We had been living in Leesburg, Virginia. I was a stay-at-home mom to two girls, the ages 4 and 2. We had decided that, the housing market was skyrocketing, and we decided, you know what, maybe this is the time to sell our home and purchase a larger home. So we signed a contract to build a new house. We put our current house on the market, and, and then life was just continuing on. And then delays started happening with our new house. We weren't going to get in by the time the school year started. Our oldest was turning 5. It was going to be her kindergarten year. And then I had a miscarriage in August. Still living in our old house, we called it. And then 9/11, September 11th. So, and as all of you know, it was a devastating day for our country, for the world. And, having family members who lived and worked in Manhattan, it was scary. There was, people in Pennsylvania, also in DC. So it was a scary time. And then we finally moved into our house on November 3rd, 2001. And we thought, wow, great. It's finally here. We can get going. And then
just picking up on that. We were so pleased that we finally had turned the corner after all those delays on November the 3rd. 5 days later, on November the 8th, I and several people from the company I was working for were let go due to extenuating circumstances of 9/11 and how we were not able to travel, and we had to make some cuts. So 5 days after we settled on our nice new house, I was unemployed. And I think that really takes us to the next day of November 27th. And maybe Kelly would like to pick up on that.
So in the interim, Mike was unemployed. He'd gotten a very part-time short-term consulting job in New Hampshire. So he had flown to New Hampshire right after Thanksgiving and was going to be there for a few days. He wasn't really sure how long. So I stayed home with the girls, and it was a Tuesday morning. It was a beautiful day, kind of like the day I'm looking at right now, sunny. There was crisp in the air. It was November, but and drove the girls to school and such. And then on the evening of the 27th, Hannah, our oldest, was going to be in her first Nutcracker stage rehearsal. So, of course, she was over the moon excited, and, got them dinner. We got in the car, and the last thing I remember is pulling out of the driveway, and they were singing to a Blues Clues CD. When I woke up to Hannah screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, wake up." And I have no visual memory, only auditory memory of people talking to me, asking me if anyone else was in the third row of the minivan I was driving. But I knew instinctively something was wrong with Olivia, and I screamed at them to save her and that they had to save her. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in the emergency room, and first thing I saw was Hannah sitting in the corner, and she looked at me and said, "Are we going to be late for my rehearsal?" And I knew enough that we weren't going to make it. But that's about all I knew. I was very confused, gave the hospital all the wrong information, except for I gave them my friend's phone number. And the reason they needed that was because they needed someone to come and to go in the ambulance with Olivia to another hospital, because this was not a trauma 1 emergency room. And they needed her to go to a trauma 1 emergency room that had a pediatric. So I did manage to give them the right number there. And she came to ride in the ambulance with Olivia, because they would not discharge me. And I had a moment where I got to see Olivia and I got to say goodbye. And that is when I realized that I was on a backboard and in a C-spine collar. At that point, I had not realized that. And then I'll go. So this was the car. Mike, do you want to say what was going on with you?
Picking up from there, I was in New Hampshire at the time, as Kelly had said, and the job that I had, we ended much earlier than I thought. And on November 27th, the job ended, I managed to get the first flight back to Dulles Airport in Virginia. And I was rushing, so I didn't have time to tell Kelly that I was actually going to be home that night. So I finally get to the house after the flight, and the house was dark. And then I remembered that, oh yes, they're at the Nutcracker rehearsal. Started to bring the bags in, and I noticed that the light on our answer machine, well, this is going back 20 plus years ago. We did have answer machines back then. I played the first message, and the first message went something like this. Mike, this is Kristen, our friend. Kelly and the girls have been in an accident. And there was a pause. And I waited during that pause for what I thought was going to be, but everyone is all right. Never got that message. Instead, Kristen was saying for me to get to the hospital as soon as possible. She probably said some other things too, but at that point in time, I kind of shut down and just started to grab that same bag that I had brought into the house and got into the car immediately. And when I arrived at the hospital, that's about the same time that Kelly arrived.
Yes, so we both arrived at the hospital, ironically, at the same time. I was wearing scrubs because when they took me out of the car, they had to cut my pants, and I didn't have any shoes or anything. I did my purse, but that was it. And so we arrived, and they escorted us to the room that Olivia was in. She was in the pediatric intensive care unit. She had a bunch of machines, hooked to her, helping her to breathe. She laid very still. She almost looked like an angel because she was laying there, on these white sheets, and she really didn't have any clothes on except for they put a diaper on her. And that was it. And she looked so tiny. And in reality, she was, she was 3. She was becoming, a person, and she just looked so small. But we had a million questions, obviously, and there weren't any answers. And the answer tended to be, we don't know. It's a wait and see. We have to see if she wakes up. We have to wait and see, what she's like when she wakes up. We have no idea how long this will be. Every question we asked her was, I don't know. We don't know. We have to wait and see. But you are to not touch her. You're not to interact with her. You are to keep her her room will be dark. It will be cold to keep the temperature down. And you just need to sit and wait. So as a parent, that's the worst thing in the world to hear, is that you can't talk to your child or you can't touch your child. But that was the protocol in 2001. And, my head was just swirling. I had no idea what was going on, what was going to happen, how could this happen to us?
Yeah, and I think to better understand things, because we were just getting hit with a flurry of questions, and we were also asking questions. We learned that during the car crash that Hannah, she basically just got a bump on the nose, and Olivia had a fractured skull, traumatic brain injury. And we didn't know until later on that she actually had to be resuscitated and to be, as she was cut out of the car and resuscitated. And that's why when we got to the hospital, we were given all these, what we thought at that time, rather peculiar requests or statements. At that time, as Kelly had said, brain injury. Back then, they felt that anything we did could cause activity to cause her brain to swell even more, even by physically touching her or talking to her. And it was extremely difficult for us. But we also went into a little bit of overdrive, trying to gather as much information as possible. whether it was the police, whether it was the doctors and nurses, what is happening right now. And a lot of it, as Kelly had said, we simply didn't know. And as for those expectations, at that point in time, Kelly's in shock. I don't really know what state of mind I was, confusion, feeling hurt, feeling helpless, feeling a sense of guilt that I wasn't there earlier. So, but the one thing that we learned from pretty quickly is to better identify who your allies are. Certain doctors, certain nurses, other professionals, they're going to go out of their way and get you more information than some others. Some others, perhaps, they give you the facts as they know it, and that's it. And as Kelly had said, that our advocacy really started there in a hospital, and it started with gathering as much information and to find out who our champions would be.
So a little story about that was that I felt as a mom after a few days, and they, she'd been stable, that just wanted to give her a sponge bath. I didn't want to, obviously disrupt any of the tubes or anything, but I thought if we could just clean her up a little bit, that would be very calming to me, I felt it would be calming to her, and I had to really advocate for that. And I finally found a nurse who agreed. And she got permission from the doctors, because obviously I didn't want to do anything that was against doctor's orders, but I really felt that this could be something important for both of us. And she sat there with me, and we gave her a sponge bath, just with a little, washcloth, just rubbing her very gently and just cleaning her up. Obviously there were a lot of things had gone on, and the relief that gave me, and that, that I was able to take care of my child in the smallest way, was huge for me. And I will never forget that moment of that nurse really coming to me and advocating on my behalf rather than going with the status quo. So it's just little things like that you have your person there, what they need and what you need, and you have to try and advocate for yourselves. So that was a moment of speaking up, of saying, this is what I think is important. This is what I need. This is what she needs. And like Mike said, finding those allies. And so when we were told that Louis was going to have to move to an inpatient rehabilitation, and the bad news was, as if that wasn't bad enough, was there was no pediatric facility within 2 hours of us. So she would either have to go south, or we could go up to Baltimore. And it put us into overdrive. She had not come out of the coma yet. They had removed the ventilator, but she was still in the coma. And I couldn't understand why they wanted to move her. I felt no one explained to me why it was time to move her. So we decided to start doing our own research, started investigating. We bought ourselves time. We bought her time to go look at these two facilities and decide, is this the best avenue for our family? Mike was still unemployed. We had another child at home. How was this all going to work? It had been hard enough going back and forth, 30 minutes to the hospital, but now having a 2-hour commute, how is this all going to play out? And so it did buy us some time. It also allowed us to process the information, and we picked the facility that we thought was going to be the best one, not just for Olivia, but also for our entire family. And so we had chosen that we were going to go up to Baltimore, to Kennedy Krieger, which is attached to Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Part of that was a relief to me, knowing that there was a hospital right there that we could get to through a tunnel, so that if anything happened, we had a facility that could take care of us. That was a huge piece for me personally, and I felt more comfortable there.
Okay. When Kelly was talking about buying us some time, initially, we were told that she would have to be moved out within 48 hours. So can you imagine how stunned we were that our child is still in a coma, and we had 48 hours to decide where she was going to be transferred to. So we were fortunate enough that we had a couple extra days so that we could physically go to both of the recommended places within that 2-hour time frame. So that was important to us. And when we start talking about speaking up, 48 hours is not a realistic time to make such a huge decision like that. So it's important that we talk about speaking up. It's the medical community, it's the therapeutic community, and it's also other communities that we'll be talking about as well.
So we did get transferred to Kennedy Krieger. At that point, Olivia, she was awake. She was still on a feeding tube. She was she couldn't really walk. She couldn't, she could talk a little bit. She tired very easily, all the typical brain injury symptoms magnified by the fact that she was 3 years old. Not understanding what was going on, not comprehending information. So we arrived and we went from a very sedate, hospital room into this whirlwind of activity, because we arrived and we got her into the bed and we got her situated, and immediately she rolled over. That was the first time she'd actually done that. So that was huge. And then all these therapists, all these doctors, all these nurses were coming in and out of the room asking all these questions. And it was so overwhelming. But the one conversation I remember is the physical therapist. And she said to Mike and I, "Tell me about Olivia. What do you want to know?" And she said, "I want to know what she liked to do before. What toys did she like to play with? What things did she like? What really, lit her up?" And of course, we knew exactly what it was. 101 Dalmatians, just like the bracelet she's wearing in this one picture. She loved that movie. She loved the puppies. She loved Disney princesses, Beauty and the Beast especially. And she just loved being a little girl. So this physical therapist was able to use that information to help Olivia in her therapy sessions, to give her that little carrot at the end of, "Okay, Olivia, if you do these tasks for me, then we can play with the puppies, or you can take your little dog for a walk," once she was able to walk safely, with the pull string, or let's play with the kid's little purse and we'll put things in and out and use your, fine motor skills. I mean, it was brilliant, because Olivia worked for that physical therapist like she worked for no one. She was always so excited to go see her and so happy. And it was a joy to see that, she was coming back slowly, but surely, we weren't sure how much, but she was definitely coming back to us.
She was, and one of the things that I was a little bit frustrated with is, as the feeding tube was coming out and Olivia started to improve, I just really felt strongly that she needed better, more nutrition, and something that she could look forward to rather than the liquid or semi-liquid food that was being fed to her. So one night, or in the early evening, I put Olivia in the wheelchair and kind of clandestine looked both ways down the hallway. And I went rather quickly and I headed towards the tunnel leading to Johns Hopkins, because they had a cafeteria there. So we made it to the cafeteria. Later on, Olivia fondly called it her restaurant. And I bought a hamburger, I bought potato chips, yogurt, pretty much a little of everything. Now, of course, I fed her, but I fed her a very minute amount of food, crumbs. It probably wasn't the smartest thing for me, but she had such a smile. She was glowing. We had the best time. It truly was a feast, even though what she ate was so nominal. but it was that whole experience that I thought was very therapeutic for her, probably for me just as well. So after our feast, got her back into the wheelchair, we made it back to her room, and there was a little note on the nightstand, and the note went something like, "Mr. Lang, that was not very appropriate for you to do that. Matter of fact, it was dangerous. She could have choked." The note said everything that it should have said. And I realized what I did was perhaps dangerous even. But nevertheless, the experience that I had in seeing her, it truly was one of the best days of my life, because I really felt that she's coming back.
So we were originally told that Olivia would be in rehab for 6 to 9 months by both facilities. And she was discharged in 2 weeks. Part of that was her. She was very stubborn, very tenacious, and she still is. And part of it was Mike and I. We pushed them really hard. We didn't want times off of therapies. We wanted her to have therapies on Saturdays and Sundays. We really wanted her to get better because we felt that bringing her home was going to help the healing process even more. But the biggest thing was to get her off that feeding tube. And so we really pushed for them to give her all the therapy she really needs. So looking back, I'm sure part of it was just to get her to a safe place and to discharge her. So we came home, and this is a picture of our daughter, Hannah, and her friend, who's Kristen's daughter, when we arrived home with Olivia. So then all the questions. We had physical therapy short-term that was going to be provided because we had stairs in our home and we had to make sure she was safe. But all the other therapies were up to us to find. So we were looking for a physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist. They not only had to have experience with brain injury, but they also had to work with the pediatric population. Back in 2001, that was really difficult to find. It was like finding a needle in a haystack. But we persevered. We ended up on a lot of waiting lists, but eventually we were able to get her most of her services privately, and at the same time got her into the special education system in their preschool program so that she would also get therapy during the school hours. She went to preschool a few days a week with the county. So she was getting hit on all sides with lots of therapy, as much as we could get, because again, we also had in our head that 2 years was going to be our mark, that after 2 years, the progress is slower. You hit a plateau. The first 2 years are the most important. So I had that number running in my head, the countdown going, like, we only have 23 months. We only have 22 months. Because I really felt that those 2 years were going to be so important. But yet I also needed to be there for my other child. I had to be there for Mike. I had to be there for myself. Did you want to add anything, Mike?
I think the one thing that we realized when we were at the hospital at Kennedy Krieger, that I would stay at the house in Virginia with Hannah, and Kelly would be with Olivia, and then we would trade off. I would take Hannah, drive up to Baltimore. Kelly and I would try to update each other as much as possible, even though we're at limited time because someone had to take Hannah back down to Virginia. It's a challenge, but we wanted to remain whole as a family, and for Hannah to have some semblance of a normal life. But we also know that we had to help and support each other, just because it's physically draining being at the hospital that whole time. So, but that homecoming meant that it was solely on our shoulders now, the speech therapy, the occupational therapy, OT, and so forth. And it was a trying time, especially since I still wasn't working.
So also coming home, we thought we'll fall right back into the routine, just like it was before, and it really wasn't. But I started to notice about a month later that there was something wrong with me. Um, I would read and I would not remember anything I read. I could not comprehend anything I was reading. I was so exhausted. I was tired all the time. I couldn't, when I woke up, I was still exhausted. I couldn't be woken up during sleep. I was in such a deep sleep. So I made an appointment with my family physician, and I have to remind you that this was January 2002. So I went in and spoke with a nurse practitioner and, told her what had been going on. And she looked at me and said, I'm going to write you a referral to a neuropsychologist. Now, me now would know exactly what she was going after with that, but I had no clue. And you would have thought I would, since Olivia had been evaluated by neuropsychologists in the hospital. So I went to the appointment, and when I got the diagnosis, I was in shock. And he said, well, you have post-concussion syndrome. Didn't give me much information about what that meant. Didn't tell me if I needed to go see any other doctors. He just said, well, this is your diagnosis. So I came home and I looked it up, and I sat there in tears that when I read that it was what was then called a mild traumatic brain injury. And I thought, I have this child that I have to try to help recover. And now I have a similar injury, and I just didn't know how I was going to do it. But the only thing I knew is I had to get up and I had to put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And that's what I did. In a way, some of it was good because it gives me a little bit of insight into what she goes through. When she would have trouble with word finding, or she got overwhelmed, or she had problems with processing, I got a little bit of what she was going through. Not 100%, as you all know, you've seen one brain injury, no two are alike. But I had to also remember to take care of myself. That was going to be, had to become more of a priority.
And I had to learn to be more patient.
So I had mentioned the preschool. So as we went through the years, we had to continually build our team. I call it a team because I tried to get them all to work together. Doctors talking to each other, working together. The school system, making sure that Olivia was getting the services that she both needed and deserved. Making sure that her individualized education plan was being met. Making sure that she was getting the services that were special, that were detailed in there, like if she was supposed to have speech therapy twice a week, that she was getting those times. And it also involved going outside of the school system to find doctors and providers who could, evaluate her and make other recommendations. And then, Mike, do you want to cover about as she got older, the other?
Sure, that the school environment is one thing, but now what do you do after you're done with school in this case? Whether it's volunteering or whether it's work, obviously you want your loved one, the person that you're caring for, to feel involved and to pursue goals. And those goals might need to be rewritten a couple times along the way. But Olivia in particular, she wanted to get a job, to get a part-time job. So what's involved with that? And you research and see what some of the options are, such as a job coach. Is there someone who can work with Olivia to better formulate and anticipate what an interview would look like, how to prepare a cover letter, a resume? Because we all know that mom and dad sometimes are not the best working with their stubborn daughter, that sometimes you need an outsider to work with them. So the job coach really was an important person to help really give us a better sense of expectations, as well as Olivia, of course. And also working with the job coach and working with the employer, whether it's with the coach or whether it's with you, about accommodations that can be sought. That someone like Olivia, she needs a little bit more time to process information. She needs things broken down into chunks rather than spilling all the things that need to be done during the shift. You just take it one at a time and you focus on that. So I think that advocating for a job coach who advocates on behalf of your child, your loved one, but also talking to your employers, because some of those employers are much more receptive for accommodations and breaks and things of that nature. And some of the employers out there have been truly terrific in trying to help that individual. And ultimately it helps the work environment as well. So advocacy, it starts from day one. And as you can see through all the different stages of life, it continues.
Yeah, and part of that advocacy is also, letting them make mistakes. So the one example is that when Olivia was applying for her first job, she did not want to disclose that she had a brain injury. And we had said, well, we don't necessarily agree with that decision, but if you want to do that, you just have to be open to the fact that it might not work out. And then at first it worked out great. And then 2 months later, it didn't work out. And part of the issue was that she had difficulty processing and learning new tasks. They felt she should be learning them quicker. And so we had a conversation that, okay, so you tried it that way. Now I think you need to tell the next employer that you do have a disability and talk about the accommodations and have the job coach help you if need be. Libby's the type doesn't like to draw a lot of attention to herself. So she tries to handle it on her own, but sometimes having that job coach there on the sidelines, whether coaching for them or that she can pull in, is so beneficial, or even someone to just bounce, ideas off of, or look, they're not giving me my break when they're supposed to. How can I handle that? That's been huge because, like Mike said, the parents usually it's not as well accepted because we don't know anything. But the job coach, that's their job, and they seem to know it.
And we also should say that one of the issues is Olivia truly has an invisible injury, and that presents a different set of challenges because people look and talk to her and they don't quite understand why she is not catching on and processing information.
And like we said, reaching out to those private services, getting doctors to do evaluations outside of the school system were key for us. Because in the schools, they saw her one way, but outside of school, they saw her a different way. And finding those doctors that really get your loved one, who understand them, who can dig down and figure out what exactly is going on. And we found that doctor finally. And she was the first one who actually said to us, as we walked in to get the results, and said, wow, you've been through a lot, but you've done everything you possibly could for her. And just that validation of knowing that you're right, we have tried to do everything we possibly can. And, we can't fix it. It's never going to go back to the way it was, but at least we know that we are doing our best to help her and assist her in trying to become independent. So it's still finding those allies. It's a different type of ally and it's in a different scenario. But you have to keep building this, what I call the team. And have them communicate with each other as well. I think it's getting a lot better than it used to be, but it's still work.
Well, as we go into this slide, we talked about advocacy on different levels, but you also, if possible, need to reach out to that individual, in our case, our daughter, to learn to advocate for herself, that Kelly and I are not always going to be around here. So we need to provide the tools so that Olivia can be that advocate and can speak up when she needs help and assistance. And this event, if Kelly wants to describe, was just a special event for all of us.
It was 2017, and it was Brain Injury Awareness Day in Washington, D.C. There's always a panel of speakers, and it usually includes someone from the CDC, a military personnel, some state program managers, and then a survivor. And this was the first year that they asked for a pediatric survivor. So Olivia was recommended, and she gave a 13-minute speech. She, to a standing ovation, and just talked about her injury, how it affected her and her life up to this point. She was a senior in high school at this point, so she talked a lot about going through the years with school and the different therapies she did, and especially music therapy, which has been a very, very important part of her recovery, and learning how to tell her story in the most succinct way and to get it across, but also it's very therapeutic for her. So this was a huge moment in our lives, I'd say all of us. So one of the things you have to remember as advocates is you're going to have different approaches. So the way I walk into a meeting, or the way I approach it, is I'm very matter of fact. My heart is on my sleeve. I might get emotional. And Mike approached it more in a business-like manner. These are the goals we need, going into this meeting. This is what we need to come out with. And we didn't subconsciously realize what we were doing, but I think those two approaches, putting it together, actually worked for our advantage. Because they saw, me, the very vested emotional mom, and then he as the very pragmatic dad. And somehow we got our message across that this is what she needed. This is what she deserved. We didn't get everything we ever wanted, for sure, but I think we were able to get a lot. And we also parent very differently. There's an example of when she was learning to swim, and I would sit on the other side of the pool deck because I knew if she saw me, she would, try to give up. And Mike was the opposite. He'd be right there on the lane line, cheering her on right there. And my neighbor pointed it out and said, "Wow, you two parent very differently." And I said, "I know that, and it works for us. It might not work for everybody, but you have to find how you're going to do that together."
So it's also developing partnerships and identifying with groups who can perhaps help, support, or really just be a forum where you can just let everything off your chest of different things that you're experiencing with. So whether or not it's getting involved with a disability group, or a group that advocates on behalf of those with disability, maybe it's getting together with parent groups of individuals perhaps going through similar or maybe even different and unique situations. I think there's always something that every participant is going to pick up that could help him or her as they guide their loved ones through their life challenges. And we also mentioned about advocacy on a different level, and that is really the legislative level. Truly get to know who your elected officials are. Don't be afraid to write to them, to meet up with them, to arrange that meeting. In that sense, they work for you. So it's up to you to let them know what's on your mind and what is being done correctly, which is important for them to hear, but also ways that need to be improved. And you might be surprised at how much traction you do have with those elected officials.
Obviously, you know your loved one the best, and you know what they need, you know what your family needs, you know what you need, and you have to always keep that in mind and fight for that. Schools and hospitals and such, they see the patient on a totally different level. but you really know in your heart and soul what your loved one needs, and your job is to try to get it, not to scream and cause a big scene, but just to be very consistent, very diligent about asking for what they truly need to get better. And celebrate the achievements. Brain injury, it steals away so much from us, but yet there are those moments of joy. There are those moments that there's achievements, and you need to learn and remember to stop and celebrate those for what they really are. Did you want to add anything to that, Mike?
I think what I would say is that when we celebrate achievements, it is so much, in our case, a family celebration, that Kelly and I can celebrate that our child is now a young adult who's moved on to a different milestone, perhaps. But for that individual, they need to know not ways that their disability is holding them back, but what their abilities are so that they can move forward. And I think that's really important. And I think that word celebrate really comes to mind into a focal point, because that smile on Olivia's face means so much to me. And she really needs to know that we're pushing her forward, and that we are celebrating her achievement as a family, as well as she should do it on her own way too.
So after many years, we talked about the journal that Mike and I kept in the hospital and the notes we took through the years, but we finally put our thoughts down on paper, and we published a book in August called The Miracle Child. And The Miracle Child comes from a comment that a pediatric neurologist made when he assessed her back when she was 4 or 5 years old. He looked at her scans and said, I've seen many, many patients over the years, children with traumatic brain injuries, and so many of them had less severe injuries than Olivia's. And her, she's walking and talking, and those other kids weren't. She's truly a miracle child. And so that comment always stayed with Mike and I, and we thought it would be the most appropriate title for the book. And it just goes through her story from the accident up until her high school graduation, which is the picture you just saw.
And
So have Mike close us out.
Well, what I'd like to do is, there's a word that means so much to me. It's an acronym. And for all you Shakespearean fans who are attending today's session, you're probably familiar with Lend Me Your Ears. Well, I like to focus on the word ear, or the acronym, because I think for us as parents, as advocates, supporters, and really communicators, the word ear, E, remember, is educate. Educate yourself, educate others about, in our case, what traumatic brain injury is. Advocate, the A in the word. You really need to push forward. If your child, your loved one, they're entitled to things, and you need to push forward and make sure that they are entitled to every right and every privilege that is endowed to them. And really, the self-advocate is a huge piece with that. And lastly, reciprocate. Give to others. We wrote this book for, well, it was a cathartic reason, really, to unload all this. But we also want to give back to the community. So we are very vested with the rescue squad, the local rescue squad. So proceeds from the book go to the rescue squad, as well as the Brain Injury Association of Virginia, where Kelly has been so active and has been a support group for us. So educate, advocate, and please reciprocate. Bring things to others, support them. And with that, we are very appreciative of the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey for having us here today. And I think we have a few minutes where we can entertain any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Kelly and Michael, for sharing your story and for the wisdom that you guys are sharing with us from your experience. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And so if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A and we can kind of go over those now while we have some couple minutes here at the end. I'll just share some individuals shared in the Q&A, just some of their experiences that were brought up as you guys were sharing. So one individual mentioned that they also had a TBI and they ended up experiencing homelessness because of some of the lack of resources and not understanding, what was out there and people not understanding the invisibility of the injury. And so this individual just wanted to acknowledge that there are many people who are homeless who have brain injuries. There's a big overlap there, and just wanted to kind of bring attention to that issue. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And then another individual also shared another experience and some of the challenges that she faced in her mom not receiving the correct resources and referrals at the time when she had her injury. So again, just making connections with some of the information you were sharing. So appreciate that. One individual asked if you can speak to this. Kelly, I think you mentioned this idea of when you heard 2 years, you kind of gravitated to that because you thought there was like a timeline there. So somebody asked, where did that concept come from? If you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. At the time, that was what everyone thought, that you have 2 years after your injury to regrow those, neurons, to, rewire your brain, so to speak. And the quicker you can get that to happen, the better. It was also the knowledge at that time that the younger you were at the time of injury, the better off you were going to be. Now, they have since debunked both those myths. I've learned through the years that any information you had already learned prior to your injury is retained. You just have to figure out how to access that. Whereas learning new things are going to be much harder. So for Olivia, like learning to read was very, very difficult because she hadn't learned how to read yet. So that was just a going thought. And honestly, I still hear people talk about the 2 years. And I still hear people who've had more recent injuries saying that they were told the same thing. So, but our brains are constantly changing and improving. I mean, so I just think as long as you're, involved with something in the community or school or work, whatever, that you're, and your interactions, we all know that brain injury is very lonely, can be a very lonely place, especially over the past few years. But just making those connections with other people and feeling that there's someone there for you is imperative.
We took that 2 years almost like an hourglass.
Yeah.
And that as the sand was running out, she would plateau. It would not be able to learn further from that. And looking back, obviously, I think we've learned from that, but we were scared, quite honestly. So we worked really hard.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And then another individual mentioned that I think her daughter has a TBI, and she was wondering if you have any suggestions on dealing with depression and anxiety, as this is something that a young person might experience who has a TBI. So I guess from a caregiver parental perspective.
If it's a teenager, they're not as willing to share sometimes, but just trying to find the right avenues for them. I mean, one thing, that we found for Olivia was the music therapy and a theater program that was for people with disabilities, because she could thrive there. And she got, to watch her face light up as she walked on stage and to see how her confidence, that self-confidence just boosting. Some people walking around in nature is what they love and, really makes them feel part of something. Others, it's like working with animals. Just finding that one thing I think is so huge.
Yeah, the issue of depression is so prevalent in our society across all different spectrums. Kelly had mentioned one area I would touch upon is working with animals, but I think a lot of times it's the care of animals, of a pet. You create that bond and you feel that you're not truly alone. So there are some times where Olivia is depressed, and sometimes she decides that she is going to curl up with a cat, one of our cats. Um, it's a challenge, but try to find avenues that give you some sort of pleasure. And if you can, try to explore new things. Try to challenge yourself, which can be very tricky.
Great recommendations. She had a follow-up to that and just also asking maybe about developing some social skills. Are there ways that you can encourage that as parents as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times we used to do is role play. Especially in middle school when she was having trouble keeping up with the girls with the conversation in the cafeteria. I mean, those girls would talk so fast, and they'd be on three, have gone over 3 topics before Olivia came up with the response on the first one. And just trying to role play with her, and trying to put ourselves back in that time of when we were in middle school, which is hard. But just trying to give her avenues where she could practice, so she could see what it was like to have that conversation, and what are some of the things she could respond with, and again, repetition, because in brain injury especially, they need that constant practicing, the constant repeating of it.
And I think also that there are several local groups that if they could approach the administration, the principals of different schools, they might be open to having individuals to come in. Olivia's involved in musical performances and the stress of empathy. And I think the kids in attendance really opened up about struggles that they were having. And you just can't emphasize the word empathy enough, especially in the public schools. So hopefully principals and the school administration is open for groups to come in and really work with the individual students that way.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And the attendee herself also said, thank you. That was very helpful. So I appreciate those answers to those questions. And I think we're just about at 1 o'clock. So I think we're going to stop it there. But if anybody has any other questions that they would like to ask, you can feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and then I could forward that question on, and we could certainly get you a response to that question. So thank you again, Kelly and Michael, for sharing all of your experience with us today. We really appreciate it. And just a reminder that the link to the post-evaluation survey has been put in the chat, so please complete that. We would love to have your feedback on today's webinar, and we hope to see you again at the next webinar on May 24th. So this concludes today's webinar. Thank you.